building every place
It
you go.
is.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know there are some last minute negotiations happening, but if you could take your seats. You want me to go through this? Yes. You want me to get another piece of paper? No, I need my stack. I'll find it. My totem carry. Okay, welcome to the second day of the Governor's Oiling Task Force meeting. This is Sarah Alexander with the Keystone Center. For those of you listening in by phone, we ask the task force members to take a seat. And we want to begin today by just doing an overview of the process going forward from here, since we left yesterday with some questions and potential vagueness around how we're going to move forward. So we'll start with how we're going to spend our time today, but really walk through how we're going to get to February 27th, which is the deadline that's in the executive order as listed by the governor. So we're going to begin with today. As we discussed yesterday, there were a number of proposals that got a fair amount of support without need of discussion that we need to go through today. Our proposal is, rather than, as we did yesterday, hearing from each of the authors on those, we will still go through those in order, but ask if there are clarifying questions that people have for them rather than having presentations on them, given that the indication in the survey was they needed less discussion and generally people were supportive of them, how they read. So we will do that. Some of them may need more clarification than others going forward. We hope to spend an hour on that, and we will see. We will try very hard to keep us on time on that, because we would like to spend the bulk of the day today, an hour and a half or so, more if we can, on continued discussion of where we started yesterday, which was on the what I'll use John Golden Dubois' metaphor of the meat and potatoes of the role of local government. Included in that, I think, is the question of the ADR process. Or not, and how that final resolution comes about if there's a disagreement between an operator, a local government, COGCC. How does that get resolved and ultimately decided is a very critical part of that conversation. The multi-well sites and considerations for multi-well sites, in particular in residential areas. And then comprehensive planning as a key tool to be more proactive about minimizing conflicts in the first place. What we have done is we've asked the authors of those proposals in each of those areas that had the least amount of opposition, or you could say the most support, to help us use those proposals as a beginning place for those conversations. We would like to pull the best from the other proposals in those areas into a more consolidated set of recommendations. If it's one recommendation or proposal, that would be great. If it's one with some options, for example, on the dispute resolution process, we may want to bring forward to the full group a couple different options for how to address that for final voting, or if there are a couple ideas and concepts that need to be pulled through in a couple different recommendations, that's fine. But we would like to spend at least an hour and a half on that this morning. We will do that in smaller groups. At sort of the half hour, we will give you an opportunity to rotate through those groups. If you would like to provide input on each of them, you're allowed to do that. If you would like to stay in one for the full length of that conversation, that is fine too. So we're not assigning you groups. We are letting you move with your feet around where you think your input will be most helpful or most needed in terms of making those the best proposals possible. We will then come back to the full group and report out on the progress within those small groups. At that point, we will take a break, and for any and all proposals, we will give you an opportunity to withdraw your proposal. So if you feel like you had a proposal on one of these three that got adequately incorporated into this redrafting and want to pull your proposal, you can do that. If you would like to, if you don't feel like it got adequately addressed but would like to make some modifications so that it complements what comes out of there or clearly poses a different option, you can do that as well. And so we will take a break to allow some time for you all to consider the original proposals that went into the group of 56. We will then come back as a full group and straw poll on any remaining proposals. That will take some time because there are changes that will need to be clear on what you're straw polling. But as we do that, we're going to go to just red, green. Anything that receives more than 11 or more green will move forward into the final drafting process. Anything that does not receive 11 green will be captured in the meeting minutes but will not go forward into the final drafting process. Any questions on that for today before? Ms. Barwinski?
I would just wanted to clarify and wanted the opportunity to take a very brief moment when we talk about the Greens to talk about a combined new proposal
Sure.
On the Reds, because it did build on our conversation yesterday. And I think it could intertwine in some of the things that we'll be discussing in our small groups later.
Great. Okay. Do that. And Ms. Corliss?
And I just wanted to clarify that the straw vote or the straw polling, whatever we're calling it, is actually not a vote, that
That's
it is
correct.
merely an indication that the proposal deserves to continue to be in the mix.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. You support it going forward into a final drafting report, which then gets us into the next process. Between February 4th, which is tomorrow, and the 17th, we will be pulling together a draft final report. So we will work with you all to edit. If we need small group drafting groups between the 4th and the 12th, we can help facilitate those, or we can work with the primary drafters to get any final edits in. So we'll work with the co-chairs and see where we are coming out of this meeting today on how much additional drafting and editing and negotiation needs to take place going into that draft final report. And again, that draft final report may include different options. So it may not represent a full consensus option on some of these issues, but might say, to Mr. George's points yesterday, there are 3 different ways we could address this, and we would like the task force to offer a final vote on where they stand on those different options. So we will work to get those clearly teed up so it's very clear what you're voting it on come February 24th. So the idea is to get you a draft final the week before that meeting, so you have a chance to vet and review that, and you can come ready for suggested edits if need be to the 24th meeting, but we will then at that point be taking formal votes on what's in that what recommendations and options are in that report. Anything that receives 14 votes at that point that will be on the record, which represents the 2/3 majority, will be represented as a formal recommendation in the final report. Proposals with fewer votes will be represented in the final report with minority views. Yes, and so Peter will have, we do need to allow Peter the 48 hours for the final vote, which is February 26th. So we will then distribute the final vote and the final report to all of you on the 26th. You will then have 24 hours to have an electronic sign off so we can submit it to the governor on the 27th. So that's if all goes well. That is the process that we'll be using going forward. It's aggressive but doable. It definitely keeps the pressure on. Any questions with respect to that process going forward? Does this clear up the questions that people had yesterday at the end of the day in terms of where we're headed and how we're going to get there? Okay. It's much clearer in the morning than it. Somebody suggested we should never meet past 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So we'll try to wrap up February 24th by 4 is the lesson learned there. Okay, with that then, we will get into the green. Those receiving green at the end of that, Sarah will come to changes to the reds, and we'll go from there. So in terms of, sorry, let me just get to that slide. So these are the proposals again that received 50% more or green. And again, we're going to walk through them. I know you all have your notes and see if you have any questions or concerns regarding them that you need answered before we straw poll on them at the end of the day today. So we will start with number 9, which is Becky Corliss's recommendation around clarifying the balance responsibilities of the COGCC. Are there any questions regarding this proposal? We'll give you a second to get there. And again, we'll move through these pretty quickly.
You don't want me to make a statement about it? I guess just answering questions is good enough, given where we are.
Unless there's anything you need to be clear, think needs to be clarified.
I would just interpose one observation here, and that is that coming to this from the perspective of having adjudicated cases for years, there is some tension in what's being asked of the COGCC to be both the entity that is fostering the development of oil and gas and also to be the ultimate arbiter of disputes that arise. And I would just suggest that coming down on one side or the other of that equation is part of what we should be discussing. If we come down on the side of leaving things where they are, then perhaps a separate body can adjudicate disputes. If, on the other hand, the authority is balanced definitionally, and by the way, I hasten to add that none of this is in any way a condemnation of the COGCC, which I think has done an extraordinary job of trying to walk this tightrope, but it is a tightrope. So I put out for your consideration that landing on one side or the other of that then suggests further steps as we move forward in this discussion.
Mr. Quinn.
Pat Quinn. I'm just curious on the 5. I mean, it seems like a pretty obvious thing to change it from foster to administer. Doesn't it? Since you're Supreme Court justice, it makes perfect sense to me. I'm curious about the 5 who said no. If anybody's willing to speak, they may not be. I mean, as to what I'd like to hear what the arguments against that change are, because I think this is kind of the status quo. At least that's what I think Mr. Lepore has told us. So I'm curious what the arguments against it are.
I'm one of the Reds. I'd be more than happy to tell you why. While it may appear to be a simple word change, I'm very concerned that does this send a message? I'm not sure it's status quo. I can interpret this to be that this changes the mission of the COGCC, which we all know and we've talked about having a dual mandate. And if this is an attempt to change the mission of the COGCC to where it now is no longer in that dual mandate, that's one of my concerns, right? And I'm not sure if that's what's intended, but that's my interpretation of that simple word change, because to me, the word foster and administer has a very different meaning. And then I guess on the other piece, it's not clear to me what it means by harmonization. I'm not sure what's intended because harmonization can mean a lot of things. And to me, it's a bit ambiguous. What does that really mean? What's intended? So that was kind of a question for you, Becky, in terms of, in terms of just clarity around that sentence. But my interpretation of the difference between foster and administer, to me, causes concern, because I do think, unless it's intended differently, maybe I'm overreading too much into it, but to me, I interpreted that as we are recommending that we change the mission of the COGCC, and I'm personally not comfortable with that.
Okay, we'll take 3 more questions on this, and then we're going to move on. So Mr. Woodall, and then Mr. Quinn, and Ms. Lackle.
Sure, and I guess I'd say I probably read it the same way that Randy said it. That is kind of an important word change, and kind of was redefined in the COGCC's role as well. And I kind of linked it a little bit to the executive order, because the executive order speaks to fostering as well. So, I mean, I think that's kind of why we're all in the room, is we're all looking for a balance. And it seems like we're kind of trying to do a division of roles and saying, you're over here administering, and I don't know who's going to foster the economic development of the oil and gas industry. But it seems like we're changing the scope, and it even kind of comes back to where the executive order said this task force is set here to foster the oil and gas development and economic benefit to the state of Colorado. So that's kind of where I read both of those things as kind of a big change.
Okay, Mr. Quinn, you put your card down. Ms. Lackle.
Hi, this is Gwen. Just a question for Randy Cleveland. Just, can you give me an example of how changing foster to administer would change your daily operations in Colorado?
Gwen, I'm not sure that, to me, that's not the relevancy. I think if you go back and look at the history of the COGC, and I think Scott said it well, the executive order was very clear on the COGC's role to help foster the development of oil and gas resources. And if this is intended to split that dual mandate, then I think it boils down to, do we not want an agency or any mechanism that fosters the development of oil and gas? And if that's the intended change, that's my issue.
Are there any clarifying questions? I want to avoid getting into too deep of a conversation about this. So any clarifying questions related to what this looks like? Lem?
Yeah, I have a clarifying question. So I won't repeat what my colleague said, which I think Peter agrees with. He was also a red vote. But it does seem outside of sort of the charge, if you will, of the executive order. And my question is, what's the original, what's the genesis and what's the history of the statute with respect to foster? My understanding is it goes back to the early 1950s. So do we really know what we're doing, what kind of impact this is going to have in terms of implementation, perhaps in the courts, should this change kind of be made here on the fly?
She was the Supreme Court justice. That can't be called.
Mr. King, do you want to comment on this?
Thank you. On that point of the history, this provision was actually changed in 2007 when the commission was revamped from a 7-member commission to a 9-member. At that point, the phrase was promote, and that word promote was modified to foster. So this discussion has been had. That was the word that was struck at that point as being the right balance, at least at that point. So that's the history of how we ended up with the word foster.
Okay, I think we're going to move on. Number 10 and 11 have been combined. These address something that's been raised several times in meetings around the pooling issues. Any questions on what those look like? And again, I believe 10 is the one that is moving forward. Okay, this one's a little more straightforward than the last. And again, this is one of those potential implementing tools to complement some of the bigger things we'll be talking about today. Ms. Corliss?
So I do need some education, if I may, on the impact that this would have, the application of the twinning rule and the drilling windows, and how this would actually be operationalized. So either Russ or Scott, could you give us the 3-minute précis?
Yeah, I can try, and Russ, you can jump in as well. What this is, I think, attempting to do is to expand a drilling unit that it could be larger. And so you would pool the mineral ownership in a larger pool and drill, in this case, probably the example is horizontal wells, which means then that you could be further away. So what it's trying to do is ease surface impacts by pooling interest, and perhaps the drilling pooling unit could be larger. That way the surface location could be further away. And so it's a way of trying to help site wells further from potential conflicted areas and still allow the operator to be able to drill and recover all of the minerals.
Okay, and again, we're looking mostly for clarifying questions at this point. Mr. Rao?
Scott, I was just wondering if you could provide some sense of scale or scope for what you think would be effective at achieving that goal in terms of size of drilling units that would make sense to try to achieve that goal.
Kind of speaking very, from 10,000 feet, we're talking about a typical drilling unit or pool, say in the Wattenberg field, kind of where the focus of the discussion is like 640 acres. And so you could probably see where you could at least double that and maybe even triple that with current technology of drilling 2 miles or greater. So you can think about at least moving another mile away when you think about how to site your locations and things. So I think that's the intent, is it would continue to give additional flexibility in siting the locations, and it still balances the responsibility of the COGCC to enable those minerals to be developed.
Just a quick follow-up. Are there mechanisms in place in the processes that exist now for setting those units, or are there mechanisms you would recommend that would help protect from abuse of that system? Because I could see, while I sort of support the idea, I could see a scenario where a larger operator could abuse it.
I don't know, I may have to defer to Director Lepore on that one. I'm not sure exactly how all that is set up. Typically, like when you set up drilling units, the person who owns the majority of the interest would end up, applying for and becoming the operator of the combined interest, typically. But
Mr. Pepler?
In our neighborhood, we've seen several pooling arrangements, particularly since the horizontal wells have come in, and they're a huge advantage. It just leaves one tank battery can handle just a ton of ground, and some of our horizontal wells are 1 tank battery and is handling wells 2 miles away, or taking oil from 2 miles away. Just tremendous impact on them, on the amount of land used. So I'm a big favor in these pooling agreements.
Okay, Mr. George, I'm going to give you an opportunity to comment, and then Dan Kelly, you'll get that last question.
Thank you. The 2, 10, and 11 come from the same source, and that was testimony at our first time together to take testimony when we were at the 6060 Broadway offices of the Division of Wildlife, is the correct name. Others would think it's Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but I reserve the right to call it the Hunter Education Building of the Division of Wildlife. What I thought was happening when this testimony came forward was that we were looking for ways to get the law to catch up with practice. And as we know, the law always will trail society's advances and changes. And so what we continue to want to do here is to give the commission the authority it needs to use the tools that seem to be working better in terms of minimizing surface impacts and being able to move some of these larger facilities into other places. I believe that's exactly what's happening here. And so that's why I wanted to advocate it.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, a couple of quick questions just to make sure, and I realize I don't understand one part of this, but the way I understand it right now is that we have with units, okay, they have to be rectangular or square. And would this offer the ability to change, to give some flexibility in that regard, to better fit, you know, these areas where we can get to our minerals from one spot that may not be as geometric, you know, Scott?
I think the answer is yes.
And they're not mandatory, right? Nothing is.
No, nothing's mandatory. It's just another tool to give the COGCC to help balance.
There are no further questions on this. I suggest we take 23, 24, and 25 together. They all address the role of the LGD, supporting the role of the LGD and the LGL. Mr. George and Mr. Hawley were the authors of these proposals. Are there any questions related to the proposals here? Any clarification needed to be offered by the authors? Relatively straightforward. Ms. Corliss. Oh.
My question goes back to a conversation we had yesterday with Matt's recommendation. Do we need to worry about how this is going to be funded?
The answer is yes.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, it takes money to do it. I believe that needs to be state money. There are a number of sources that can be used. I think because we know we have a tool that works, if the state uses the tool or requires the use of the tool or makes it possible, the only appropriate way to do that, from a good government standpoint, in my opinion, is he who causes it should pay for it. And so I stayed out of that discussion because we're simply recommending we can advance the principle and say to the state, and I use scholarship just because it's a popular word in my life these days, but it suggests that you don't make it a requirement on the recipient, and that's the local government. So I just opted not to try to determine the source. That'll come with the passage of the rule and whatever changes are made. But I would want us, if we're passing this, to make it clear, don't make it an unfunded mandate. It's a good tool, fund it, and put it to its best use.
Mr. Hawley, do you want to address how you address that in your proposal?
Yeah, I think, I think Russ's comments are well put. I think we should make a recommendation here, but there is the Energy and Mineral Impact Assistance Fund, which 50% of the severance tax goes to that fund, and then a portion of this is allocated back to the locals, and the rest goes to a grant fund and apply for that grant. So that's how we kind of addressed it in 25. I think an important distinction with the discussion we had yesterday, though, is that we just think this is very good to give the LGD involved in the process early to have impact on the conditions of approval and then be able to put those in, but then allow the COGC to have the enforcement of those COAs, so we're not creating a dual or redundant enforcement.
Okay, Mr. Golden Dubois and then Ms. Barwinski.
Thank you. I think this is a question for both Russ and for Brad. Do you envision these proposals in the LGD process exclusively as a standalone process, or could you see the enhanced LGD process working in concert with some of the other proposals that are on the table, including increasing some of the authority and clarifying authority for local governments on some of these key issues that we've talked about, and establishing some of the other processes that, Russ, I think you've outlined certainly in one of your proposals, and Brad, I think you did as well. Could these work together with some of those things, or are these intended to be exclusive of those?
John, we certainly see it in concert.
I didn't intend to reinvent this wheel, just enlarge it. And I believe there's plenty of room for it to work into any one of these areas of advancement or conflict, however you want to view it. And so, yes, I believe it would expand into it according to the LGD has a more hands-on active role in all of that. The LGL is an advocate. You need both of those opportunities. And of course, you'd expect their duties to rise to the occasion of any changed or enhanced regulatory scheme that we would promote.
Ms. Parwinski.
I think this goes right along with the spirit of what you've been talking about, but I wonder if you would consider something like a best practices for LGDs, not that would be mandated across the state, but as I've mentioned before, when you only have one for 23,000 wells, that's a problem. And so, and I do know that there's some jurisdictions that it's working better, and so some of that, cross-sharing, and I think some of that with funding could help as well. But perhaps it's not just one LGD per jurisdiction. There may be some best practices that could come up with, well, what would be optimum for the kind of role, expanded or not, that this moves into? What really does it take to do it right? So I would like that to maybe be woven in. Are these going to be collapsed in the?
Sure. I think that are they going to be collapsed is still an open question that we can work on through break. Ideally, their intent seems similar enough that we could probably come into the 24th with a single recommendation on this, but we'll have to work with the authors on that. Any response, though, to Ms. Parwinski's request?
I'm satisfied these can be written into one and get all the principles in. And I believe best practices is assumed anyway in virtually everything we do. It does not hurt my feelings ever to add and work towards best management practices. I stop short of requiring them as a matter of law. But
Exactly.
Certainly, here's where you want to see an advocacy of best management practices every time out.
Thank you.
Sarah, I'd just say I think your point is well founded, and that's why our second bullet point was about enhanced education. And we see that as a big part of this, is we have to educate on how to use them and how they're used effectively.
Thank you.
Mr. Shura?
Yeah, I'm a little uncomfortable having this be funded from severance taxes, given that severance taxes is so low in the state. We had some testimony from Director Lepore, who stated that the Environmental Response Fund is at its lowest level that it can be. And could that be a source of funding for these positions? Where, again, that would come right out of revenues, additional mill would more than cover it, I'm sure. And it wouldn't be something that we're taking from local governments. It would be new revenue stream that was coming into local governments, building a bigger pie, as it were.
Something to consider. Any formal response to that at this point?
Oh, that was a question for Brad, I guess.
Yeah.
If you'd be willing to look at the Environmental Response Fund.
And you don't have to respond immediately if you need to think about
Sorry.
that.
I just think
Okay.
I would just say, I think Mr. George's comments were well put. I think we ought to make a recommendation, and the funding mechanism is likely to be determined by others.
Mr. Lepore, did you have any clarification on that? If you don't, that's okay. But you looked like maybe you wanted to weigh in.
Good morning. So I think that I didn't communicate well with you, Mr. Sura. I don't think I said what I think you heard about the state of the emergency response fund. I'll just point out there are 161 LGDs right now, all of them being paid for by the county or municipality. For us to begin to pay for those positions, that's a big number. 161 times whatever that salary might be and benefits and what have you. So I just think not quite ready to sign off on the idea that that's coming out of the IRF fund right now. There are sources, I think, available, and I also think that the recommendation might ask the General Assembly to look at how they would fund those things.
Mr. George?
I don't think the implication is in any of these that we pull back from what exists now. This is an add-on. And what I don't want to do is say to a county that is already stretched, you need to have 3 or 4 more LGDs and you have to pay for them. That was what I was trying to avoid. I want to say to them, you could use 2 or 3 more, and if you can't afford the addition, we'll help you do that. Now that may be, I mean, that might not work politically because you might have the county saying, well, if you're paying for theirs, you're paying for mine. That would be the worry, but that's not what the recommendation is. You don't get off the hook. You'll keep paying for the 161, or the counties will, excuse me. Counties are not let off the hook, but they're already committed. It's the extra, what isn't committed, what isn't happening that we're trying to reach into.
Okay.
And if I may, just so everyone is clear, there are, to the best of my knowledge, exactly 2 counties who have a dedicated LGD. The other 159, the LGD is somebody who's in the planning staff or who's wearing at least 2 hats. I think a wonderful expansion or addition of the LGD process would be more dedicated single LGD. That's my only job, but that's where there would be a funding. I think the counties and municipalities would tell you, we'll do that when you fund it.
Okay. And again, there was a line drawn by the survey, not necessarily by the grouping. We do also have proposal 26 that we discussed yesterday around impact fees that may also be a source of funding for this, that you should think about as you're pulling these together. Any other questions on this one? Okay, the next set, 27 through 30, again, are very similar in intent around COGCC staffing. Matt, you may not want to go too far in case there are any questions on this. Again, we have 2 sets of proposals that have been combined. One set generally supports the notion of increased staffing for COGCC. And it does not go into the level of specificity that the other proposal does. So that, again, 27 and 29 have been combined into one that specifies the exact staffing that was requested by Mr. Lepore, 27 and 30 have been combined, and 29 and 28 which are not as specific, have been combined. So as we go into polling for this, the question for the task force is, do you want to go forward with a specific recommendation in terms of how that staffing is used, or a more general recommendation to increase staffing? Mr. Busher, you're one of the authors on these. Do you want to?
Yes, Elbra and I worked together on number 27. I believe the staffing levels laid out in number 27 are essentially the same staffing levels in a different order that Russ laid out in number 30. I have no pride of authorship. The language in here is mostly cut and pasted from the presentation that Matt gave to us. I don't see any reason why we can't combine these into any one of the four and proceed.
And Mr. George, you are also an author here.
Elbra asked me to apologize for her absence this morning. She knew this was coming up. She needed to be at her workplace on a task she was chairing this morning, but she would have had us say exactly what Bernie has said, that we took what Matt was saying as a good organizational effort, and he did come to us with documentation in the nature of explaining and justifying why each was needed. That's the absolute right way to do that. He can't expect legislature, Joint Budget Committee, to do anything with the request, nor can we expect them to do anything with the request if there isn't that detail in terms of here's who I need, where, and why. And that's what he presented. That's why we kept the numbers as he presented to us. And we're certainly combining two or three of them, and the fourth one can join in. I think it's all going the same direction.
Mr. Pierce, as another co-author on this.
Thank you. This is Perry Pierce. I think we all are trying to get to the same place. Frankly, I did not include the specific numbers in mine because I have a sense of the complexity of the process after a recommendation on this subject is passed. And I think what we need to do is to recommend to the administration that we think additional staff and funding is necessary, but they're going to have to go get it. And they're going to have to really prepare and justify everything they seek. And I appreciated Matt's presentation to us and his request for 16 or 22 or something. But we all have been around, a lot of us have been around the Joint Budget Committee, and we know how tough that can be. And so I want to give the administration an opening to ask for as much as they think they can possibly get. But I'm not the political insider who knows what that is. That's the only reason I left the numbers out.
And Ms. Corliss, or Mr. Kelly first.
Thank you, Dan Kelly. I'd just like to, I think, echo what Mr. Pierce just talked about. Certainly support the initiative to have the proper resources in the COGCC and would absolutely support this. But I do think that with the change in the dynamics of the oil business in Colorado, there's going to be a substantial decrease in capital spent on day-to-day operations here over the next year or two, most likely. And so I think it's important that we weigh that change of operation and that change of activity with this request, and just keep that in mind. And that's why I think it's important, not necessarily to fill in the numbers, but to open up the process and support the process, but let that work itself out as these changing conditions come forward. So thank you.
Corliss.
So it does seem that really the only issue that this group needs to answer in providing direction to the drafting committee is whether they want to go specific or general. I can see arguments both ways, but it would seem to me that we need some direction on that at some point today.
Randy Cleveland. Mr. Lepore, I do not want to put you on the spot, but and you certainly don't need to, but to the extent you have a preference, desire, because I can only imagine, I think, Dan makes a very good point. world's changed quite a bit in the last few months, and I don't know how elastic your, thoughts are in terms of what you need. So to the extent you can offer any thoughts, we'd be more than welcome to take those.
Thank you, Mr. Cleveland. I don't know why you would change now, not wanting to put me on the spot, but so I would tell you that the agency and the administration are pretty attuned to the changing dynamics that are changing pretty rapidly right in front of our eyes. And in response to that, we, I think, are committed to and feel it's incumbent on us to be a little bit elastic and to stretch where we can stretch and realign where we can realign. And in that spirit, I would say that certainly the 22 is probably not where we think we should be. 16 might be the very, very, very high end of where we think. What I would like is something that is robust and strong and clear in the recommendation in terms of increasing our staff. If it doesn't have a hard number in there, we'll put forward what we can that we think is appropriate at that time. If I were going to pick a number right now, that number might be 10 or 12 rather than where we were just a few weeks ago. It would take what I showed you a few weeks ago and trim 1 or 2 or 3, from where we think we can fill with what we have now. That help? Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, a couple questions on this. Ms. Barwinski and then Mr. Golden Dubois, and Mr. George, are you up as well?
I have an outstanding idea for drafting, but
Okay, let's take the last 2 comments and we'll close with your drafting proposal. Ms. Barwinski and
Thank
Mr.
you.
Golden.
I do recall in certain discussions, especially in our small group discussion, that part of recommendations maybe ought to be what ought to be and not what ought to be able to be funded in this environment. And I do know that sometimes, especially on the inspectors, there was a feeling that we really weren't robust enough even with that additional request. So I understand the current fiscal realities, and I've certainly lobbied budget committees, but I think that part of what I was hearing people say is that maybe it should be tied to a standard. And in the drafting, I trust people could work that out, and I would support the range of options, but I would like people to consider that we thought that it needed to be increased substantially and maybe even tied to some sort of internal process, which it would be what would be adequate staffing, and this is where we can get to now, but with that goal that there be a more robust regulatory system.
Thank you, Mr. Golden Dubois.
I cede my time.
Okay, Mr. George.
So the 29 and 28 are already very well drafted in terms of the more generalized direction, which we all subscribe to. So from a drafting standpoint, those two can be harmonized, certain, to say what they're both saying. But my hope would be that we'd say, and on this subject, there was considerable discussion and agreement among the panel to advance these opportunities at least, and then list them out. That way you just state the reality. I think the public would like to hear that we're looking at increasing the number of inspectors, for example. And since we've talked about some numbers, we've seen some justification for it, I think we ought to say so. So I don't see any contradiction at all in writing all 4 of these pieces into the same recommendation.
So again, at our break after the small groups, we can pull a group together to come up with a final recommendation on this. If we need further feedback through the polling on level of specificity, that group can tee up 2 options for polling. Okay. If there are no further comments on this, we'll move into the recommendations that focus on some of the health issues and studies. Recommendation number 31, Mr. George, you're up again in terms of encouraging studies. Any clarifying questions on recommendation number 31, which is Russ George's support to promote proposed health studies related to oil and gas development? Mr. Tour.
So I wanted to be sure.
Mr. George and then Mr. Tour.
I wanted to be sure we were very strong about specific studies, focusing attention to efforts. And so I looked through all the materials we had been given that day. That was an excellent presentation by the 4 presenters. And I was fairly hopeful that there would be a number of similar recommendations. So I picked the one that had what I thought were the most important studies that have somewhat been neglected and needed to move forward. So I took these right out of the materials. I don't intend them to be exclusive, but I thought it was worthwhile in the very strong message we want to communicate about health issues moving forward, that we list some of these very serious parts. So I don't have any exclusive thoughts about it. I think this can be included with some of the others.
Mr. Tour.
Thanks. I think this one is a great recommendation, but had just a couple of questions on it. One, I think there was some discussion from Dr. Wolk about a health registry and didn't see that on the list, and was wondering whether you would be open to that being on the list.
Yeah, the registry, and there are a couple others that I'm expecting a drafting opportunity to add those other pieces that others are recommending as well. I didn't try to be exhaustive or exclusive.
But you're open to combining those.
I am.
Other question is, in terms of who the recommendation goes to, it specifies that there's no rules or statutory changes required, but there likely are funding that would be required. And would you be open to broadening this to say that we recommend that these studies be funded? Okay.
Okay. Mr. Golden Dubois, Mr. Pearson, Ms. Corliss.
I had the same question around funding, so that's good to hear. The other question that I had for you is, in this process, we had several experts talk to us about the lack of information. I think you've done a great job of detailing what's there. I guess I'm interested in figuring out a timeline, because that was the other piece that worried me in terms of their presentation, is they documented a lack of knowledge in a whole series of different issues, which you have listed here. But I didn't have a sense or come out of that conversation at all with a sense of, okay, so we're going to do these things within this time frame. So are there some parameters we could put or begin to put to ensure that these things happen in some sort of timely fashion?
Madam Chair, I'll answer. It's all about money. And I think that message was crystal clear from the panel. And there's nothing new about that. The health study world in this country is all about grants from public and private. And as we know, it's very competitive. So I certainly wouldn't have any way of beginning to imagine how we could influence that movement of money. If you're asking, should we have some language about urgency or seriousness or anything along that line, every adjective you could think of would probably suit me in this respect, because I think we all recognize that the more we know about the truth of the health impacts of all parts of air and water and activities of any kind, we should be doing it.
Okay, Mr. Pierce, and then Ms. Corliss, and then Mr. Busher.
Thank you. Brief comment, and it is addressed to Mr. George, and that is that I hope you will take the drafting opportunity to consider meshing together 31 and 32. I like the recommendation of study
sort of focus of 32, and I think including your list of subject areas and perhaps expanding that, those two together, I think, move closer to what I would like to see. But I'm not drafting this, so.
Okay, Ms. Corliss, you might respond directly to that as the author of 32
Well,
as well.
I'm perfectly happy to see that happen, but that then dovetails directly into what interrelationship, Bernie, does this have with 56, right?
Thank you. 56, let me describe the genesis of 56. Elbra and I met with Dr. Larry Walk, talked through the difference between assessments and studies. And based on that, with a lot of cut and pasting and very little original authorship, we put together 56. I think 56 in many ways encompasses almost everything that is included, if not everything, in 31 and 32. And I'm very willing to sit down with those authors and make sure that we've covered all the bases. I think the one or two things that 56 does in addition is lay out the importance of the registry, also the importance of the air quality monitoring unit, and the human health risk assessment. So I think there's a lot of things that 56 covers in addition to what's covered in 31 and 32, but I think it catches most of 31 and 32, hopefully.
And 33.
And potentially 33. Mr. Kelly, you might weigh in on that as well as author of 33.
Yes, and 33.
I'll try to just be brief. We would certainly support moving the issues in 33 into something that would be, authored together to support the manpower needs and the air monitoring van, along with a health assessment. I think that's a great idea. Thanks.
And as 33 got 95% green, might want to incorporate that into all of the recommendations to see if you can get them to go forward. So, Mr. Busher and then Mr. Fitzgerald.
You know, I should have mentioned 34. I think we've got most of the items, the substantive items in 34. We have a longer timeframe. This is a slow process, and I believe 56 has an initial report in October of 2016.
Mr. Fitzgerald, do you want to respond to that author of 34?
Yeah, I would say that, and I like the deadline they put in 36. That helps a lot. But I think there's a lot of studies out right now that are very important and could be put together without doing new research. I support all the new research and new studies and the health assessment people want to do. But what I proposed is I would like to see them spend 2 or 3 months putting together a report on the current studies. And this is partly because I think what those studies suggest right now is quite alarming. They don't prove anything, but they're really alarming. And what's going to come out to the public about what are we going to do about public health is we recommend more studies. And I'd like to see us put some kind of a deadline of 2 or 3 months on summarizing existing studies, both here in Colorado and nationally, and making some recommendation about whether the drilling ought to go on under such circumstances.
Great, thank you. So there is a proposal on the table to combine 31, 32, 33, and 56, potentially using 56 as a straw man. So we'll see if we can get that accomplished over break, if that that makes sense. And then incorporating, Jim, what you just suggested, I think was slightly different than what's captured in those other proposals. So we can bring that forward. Or you can work with that drafting group to see if it gets incorporated.
Yeah, in my 34, I suggested stop the drilling as soon as it starts, and I would take that out. I don't think it's going to get any support.
Okay. Any other questions on the suite of health recommendations, given that it's looking like there is momentum to combine them into a single recommendation? Bernie, are you complete?
I'm sorry?
Are you finished?
I am finished.
Okay.
More than.
Okay. Then we will move on to number 37, which is Russ George's recommendation to reduce truck traffic on public. Oh, did I skip one? 35. I'm sorry. 35, which is, which I don't have in my packet, which is why I skipped it. Jeff Robbins, noise. Any questions for Jeff on his proposal on the noise impacts? Any clarifications you feel you need to make, Mr. Robbins? Okay. Okay, then we'll move on to number 37, Mr. George's proposal to reduce truck traffic. Any questions for Mr. George? Mr. George, any clarifications we need to offer?
Can I go ahead? This one was hard because what I don't want to do is to try to go down the path. This is the same conversation we had yesterday about requiring best management practices. I just don't think we're in a place where we can say, you've got to stop trucks in this site tomorrow. You've got to put in a pipeline so that you don't have the trucks. We can't do that. Those are business decisions. They're site specific. They're investment specific. And I just didn't want to go down that path. Yet we heard constantly, this is one of the biggest impacts. What can we do about it? So I guess we're always subject to criticism that when we hit a really hard, unsolvable problem, we say, let's go study it. But in fact, that is exactly what you have to do when you have what appears to be a very intransigent, unsolvable problem. And when you get the pipeline people and the trucking people and the oil and gas people together, where you have a public-private enterprise anyway, these are public roads for the most part, so you've got to have the public entities in. And CDOT has a lot of resources, and they spend a lot of time working on these issues all across the country. So that was partly because of my familiarity with the resources that CDOT can bring to the table, and that you could find the stakeholders who must include the trucking industry because they have something at stake. And you also have this serious right-of-way issue. If you're going to say you can't use trucks on roads, then where are you going to put the pipelines? And who's going to pay for all that? And who's going to do the legal work to do it? So that's why I felt that we had to say something about this very important issue. We had to have something that would actually help move us forward to some solutions. This is the best I could come up with. I think it's worth doing.
Okay. Any questions on this one? Again, fairly high level support. Mr. Tour.
Yeah, Russ, so I support this idea of trying to look at opportunities to reduce truck traffic. I'm wondering about one potential broadening to this, because I think one of the issues is the direct traffic impacts. The other is the impact of all of the diesel exhaust. And I think one of the challenges is that you have many subcontractors who have older trucks from before the 2007 EPA standards really began cleaning up trucks significantly. And I think an interesting piece would be to see if whatever task force was put together to look at this could also include CDPHE and be looking at opportunities for essentially replacement of older and dirtier trucks that are servicing the industry with the newer trucks